Hey guys, my name's James and welcome to the fourth part in a series of videos I'm making for the channel on the use of magic. This is a simple look at the hexes in the game with some strengths, weaknesses and possible situations to use each spell. It'll be simple stuff, but I hope you find it useful. Enjoy the video. Unlike the other types of magic, hexes are cast from either a talisman or a catalyst. And some catalysts, such as the Staff of Wisdom, will not cast hexes at all, the same as the Kaiser's Chime will only cast hexes and not miracles. These spells need a mixed requirement of faith and intelligence, so I'm mostly aimed at pure casters rather than hybrid characters. Either way, hexes count as hexes that deal dark damage no matter what you cast them with, so bear this in mind when choosing equipment. First up is Dark Orb. This is a basic hex that deals dark damage in a straight line along with stamina damage and is cast with a catalyst. This one is similar to Soul Arrow but lacks any kind of tracking. Now, due to its low requirement and high amount of usage, this is a great one for the single player, as dark damage is effective against most enemies. It's less useful against other players online due to the lack of tracking, but it does deal stamina damage, so it is still one to consider if you have a spare slot. Next is Dark Hail. This fires a bunch of small dark orbs out in the style of a shotgun. It's cast with a catalyst and deals more damage the closer you are to the opponent. Now, whilst you can use this for the massive obvious damage up close, such as after a guard break or parry, it is a pretty good one at long range to keep someone on their toes or hit someone who likes to dodge. Now, Dark Hail is about as punishable as any other spell that's cast this way, which for the most part isn't too bad unless you cast it too obviously, so I would say it's a pretty solid choice. Moving on, we have Dark Fog. This is the hex's answer to Poison Mist and creates a dark cloud that builds poison for all who enter. This has all the same uses as Poison Mist, such as clouding the area for a surprise attack or causing panic in a small area. However, it takes 2 slots to use, along with 25 intelligence and 14 faith, compared to the 1 slot and 0 stat requirement of the Poison Mist Pyromancy. Now, this might seem like a waste of time in that respect, but Dark Fog has a bigger area of effect, and the cloud animation does start a little bit faster, meaning that you'll be able to catch someone who's dodging much easier with this spell. Next is Affinity, which is a hex answer to Home in Soulmass and one of the best hexes in my opinion. This one is cast with a catalyst and requires 24 faith and 40 intelligence to cast at base level. Now, you'll spawn 3 orbs at 40 intelligence, 4 orbs at 50 intelligence and 5 orbs at 60, making it one of the most costly stat investment spells in the game, especially since it takes up 3 achievement slots to use. Now, just like Home in Soulmass, this one is good for the single player, but unlike most top tier spells, this one has many uses. So you could cast it just before a tough enemy and then run in with a melee for a double attack, or run towards a group of enemies so that this spell kills one of them, leaving you free to attack something else at the same time. Now, it is worth remembering that anything touching these orbs, like a wall, will cause the orb to vanish, so you need to bear this in mind when going past a wall, going under a small archway or through a fog gate. It will cancel the spell. Now, against other players online, this has to be one of the best spells. As you can see, it tracks really well, better than almost anything else in the game. It does huge damage, so it makes it perfect for combos. You can actually cast this facing backwards as well for some more control, and you can use back steps to manoeuvre around, and it can really slow down the pace of the fight. Moving on is Whisper of Despair. This one fires off a pretty cool looking skull that deals no damage, but it tracks very well, and when it hits it lowers the physical defense of the target. This one won't be so much used in a single player as it doesn't work on bosses, and regular enemies are much better dealt with using direct damage. But against other people online, this will be a great addition to a mostly melee build to cast at the start of a fight, just to gain some extra damage advantage without being too much of a caster. This next one is Repel, which makes you immune to all types of damage at the moment it's cast. It's very stats hungry and doesn't have many practical uses due to the short time of effect. In the single player, this one could be used to tank through a big boss area of effect spell or an attack, and stay close for a follow-up attack instead of running away, but your timing will need to be pretty perfect for this to work. Against other players online, the timing for this is actually harder than most roll timings, and since you are stunned just the same as normal, it is just not worth the risk in my opinion. So if anyone does have a practical use of this spell, please leave a comment on the video and I'd really appreciate the feedback. Now we come to Twisted Barricade, which is very similar to Repel in the way of cast animation and duration, except this one only works on spells. By duration, it reflects spells back at the caster, and as you can see here, that is the case. However, whether you're locked on or not, or the type of spell, doesn't change the fact that these spells deal no damage to whatever they hit. This one does take less stat investment than Repel, and since its reflecting spells won't stagger you, which is a huge advantage. This one is best used against single player bosses that have a magic area effect attack, so you can remain close for a follow-up attack. Next is a self buff called Numbness. This spell increases your physical defense but also impairs vision by darkening the edges of the screen. The defense increase is nice in any situation, and whilst the amount isn't huge by itself, it can be stacked with other buffs like Sacred Oath and Resonant Flesh to really ramp up your defense, especially if you already have heavy armor on. The screen darkening isn't too much of a problem in one-on-one fights or against some bosses, but you'll quickly lose sight of multiple targets if you invade a host who has phantoms. This also applies for most of the single player if it's an area that you're not completely familiar with. Moving on, we have Scraps of Life, which is the first of 2 area hexes. This one spawns dark energy to rise from the ground, which damages anything it hits, making it similar to the Heavenly Thunder Miracle. In comparison, this one lasts slightly longer, has more active pillars of damage, has a bigger chance to hit, causes knockdown when it isn't blocked, and is arguably the better damage type. The multi-hits from this one make it a good choice against the boss who will likely take damage more than once, and you have the freedom to move around after the cast. So this is a great spell all around with very few weaknesses. The next area spell is called Darkstorm. This one requires 2 slots and a higher stat requirement to use than Scraps of Life, but it also deals more damage. This one creates a whirlwind of dark damage around the caster and causes some good multiple hits that will be effective against the boss for the damage, and also causes knockdown for most players online. The most effective way to use this, I would say, is when someone is getting up from the ground so as to catch them when they try and roll away or go on the offensive. The obvious weakness to this one is that whilst it is a hard one to punish with just melee, it locks you in place for the duration, so the same as Firestorm, you're very open to ranged attacks. It's also worth noting that when you get interrupted casting this spell, the effect stops right away, unlike Firestorm which carries on, meaning that Firestorm might be a better choice in some situations. Next up we have the weapon buffs for Hexes, Dark Weapon and Resonant Weapon. These both add dark damage to the weapon in the opposite hand, and since dark damage is generally the most useful damage type, this is never a bad thing. As with all buffs, they do cancel when the weapon is swapped out, and if you use spices to lower the stat requirement, the duration will be shorter. The difference between these 2 spells is that Resonant Weapon is cast for the Talisman, takes 2 slots, costs souls to use and requires more stat investment. Before the most recent patch it also gave more of a damage bonus, but as you can see here, at least with the smaller weapons the damage is now the same. I would expect this to be patched at a later date, but for now Dark Weapon is definitely the more efficient choice. Moving on, we have Resonant Flesh. This one temporarily increases your maximum health at the cost of souls. You will need to heal up the extra health gained as it isn't present right from the cast, but aside from this there isn't really a lot to say as extra health is always useful, providing you can spare the souls to cast it. Next we have the main damage hexes, Resonant Soul, Great Resonant Soul and Climax. These all deal dark damage in a straight line at the cost of souls, with Resonant Soul costing 100 souls, Great Resonant Soul costing 500, and Climax costing all that you have. Now 100 and 500 aren't really a lot to lose unless your character is power in 2 levels, so the drawback isn't too bad for those 2, and they can be pretty effective in both the single player and against players online. One thing to bear in mind is that whilst these souls deal more damage than other projectiles and fire very quickly, they don't track at all, so it won't always be easy to hit someone who's comfortable dodging unless you set up a combo. It's also worth noting that if you don't have the required souls to cast these spells, the damage will be very small and not worth using at all. After the most recent patch, Great Resonant Soul has its usage reduced, but its damage boosted, so it will be closer damage to that of a Soul Spear now, if not more. Climax is the hardest hitting spell in the game, and with the right talisman will kill most online players in one hit. This one's a bad choice in Arena where you gain no souls even if you win, and also a bad choice for blue invaders as they gain no souls either to replace the ones used. This is, however, not a bad choice for a red invader, as killing a host will replace the souls you used, and this one will be its most effective when you have at least 5,000 souls. I do have a video where invaders are red and use Climax on hosts along with their phantoms, and since each kill gained souls, I was able to cast it in succession as long as each target was hit. Another good use for this one would be for a speedrunner who isn't too bothered about using souls to level up, and just wants to do a quick burst of damage on a boss before using other attacks. The final thing to say about Climax is that it takes a huge stat investment along with more spell slots than most, so it's a huge loss if you miss and can't be cast over and over again like Great Resonant Soul, unless each kill is going to get you 5,000 souls or more. Moving on, we have Profound Still. This one has a huge range and prevents casting for any opponent hit by it. This is no longer a self buff like Vow of Silence was in Dark Souls 1, so after you hit someone with it, you don't need to be staying near them for the effect to last. It doesn't have too many uses in the single player, but against someone else online it's great because it cannot be rolled through to my knowledge, and it doesn't affect the caster or its allies, so there's pretty much zero drawbacks if you manage to pull it off. With the new download content, there is actually a helmet called the Priestess Tiara that blocks this spell, so that's the only time not to use it against somebody else online. Now we come to the first of my favourite two hexes, Dead Again. These are some clips from a video of mine to show it in action, and this one causes all corpses in range to light up purple and then explode, causing huge dark damage depending on how many explosions hit. The maximum corpses can be affected is 5, and since many opponents in the single player dissolve, this spell's usefulness is very dependent on the area. Now it can affect the opponents that do dissolve, but you have to cast it just at the right time as they're about to die. The best use of this one that I can say is to lure other players online towards a pile of dead bodies and then either jump out of Chameleon and cast it for a surprise, or to fight normally with melee up close or something and then cast this one randomly to throw them off. Finally for Hexes is Life Drain Patch, and this is the most unique spell in the game in my opinion. This one creates a ball of darkness that damages health and stamina for anyone near it. And it's a pretty good spell for the single player if you want to cast it in a hallway to force enemies near it, or to cast on a slow boss to get the multi-hits. Against other players online this wouldn't really count as an area spell like the Firestorm variety, but again it could be used to block off a hallway whilst you buff or heal or get another attack ready from the other side. It's actually pretty good in open spaces too, because whilst it's active, most duelists will see it as a central point that they can't touch. The reason for this is the stamina damage, because unless you have very high stamina amount, this will drain all of it on the first hit, meaning you can't tank the damage and just run through to punish someone on the other side, just like the Firestorm spells. And because of this huge stamina loss, it's the best spell to use against someone who's on a zip line or ladder to make them fall off. If you want to see this spell or the previous one in action, I've got a video on my channel called Passive Aggression, and it shows just how to use these the most effectively. Now what makes this spell really unique is that it also damages friendly targets, as well as the caster if they get too close, meaning that competitive uses aside, you can use this to mess with a host if you're a White Phantom, or mess with a White Phantom if you're the host. This is currently the only spell to do this, making it great for creative mischief. Alright guys, that's it for Hexes, and that concludes this small series on a basic look at magic. I know it's been fairly simple stuff, but I hope it's been useful at least in some way. Now my next couple of videos are going to be DLC invasions with themed magic build, and then the one after that is going to be a look at magic combos on a pure cast with all 4 types. So if you've got any combos that you'd like to see showcased or you think I won't know about, please comment below and I'll be sure to include them in the video. I just want to say a massive thank you to anyone who's watched these videos and had the patience to sit all the way through. You know, it's not my usual theme of 6 or 7 minutes worth of trolling montage with some music. You know, going from that to something informative that's twice as long with commentary it's a bit out of my comfort zone, and it's also quite nerve-wracking to be honest. I really appreciate all the supportive comments you guys have given. It means a lot to me. So once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.